The small village of Multi Hollows was always a quiet place. It was located in the middle of the country, yet far from all the major cities. Multi Hollows was known for nothing. I'm not exaggerating. It is the kind of place no one ever heard of. And you could just about find it on the map, but, well, that's about it. I know a lot about Multi Hollows now, but it wasn't always like this. I haven't always been a local. I moved here 2 years ago when I was only 16 years old, and I used to live in one of the major cities before, but after my mother's death, I had to come here to live with my grandma. My mom was the only person I had in life, but I'm not gonna lie. My mom's death never affected me too much. My mom never wanted me in the first place, and it showed. She used to care about her appearance and other shallow things more than she cared about me. I think my mom is one of the reasons why I don't like women. The problem is, I don't seem to like men either. I'm not sure of my orientation or if I even have one. I just know that I never like anyone in that way. Once I got told I had to move to the village, the first thing I did was search information about the place. But there wasn't much to see. There's no online information about this place. And I know some other places that don't have a Wikipedia page or any information about them either because they're too small. And that's why I felt better when I went to the local library and found an old book that had a map and some black and white pictures of the village. The photos were interesting. You could see a few houses and some people walking by. And I used to speak to the librarian, so as a goodbye present, she let me keep the book. A few days later after finding the book, I had to travel to the village. It was a long ride, and I had to take at least 4 different trains and go to 3 different towns to get there. And once I got there, I got picked up by a man in his early 30s who claimed to be my uncle. I never knew I had an uncle because my mom never spoke about her family or her origins at all. But there was something about that man. I knew he was saying the truth. He had the same blue eyes and slightly pale skin my mom had. He grabbed my luggage and put it in his Jeep, and then we headed out to my new home. The trip with my uncle took exactly 2 hours, and as soon as we got there, I was captivated by how beautiful the little town was. It was, I don't even know, picturesque, I guess you could say. The men wore outfits similar to my uncle, big boots, a cowboy-style hat, and simple t-shirts. And the women wore dresses or long skirts. It seemed like a very old-fashioned place, but I did feel comfortable. It was better than the things I sometimes had to see in the city. At my new house, I was greeted by my grandma, who was very old. She was a nice, lovely woman, but already she was a bit sick. The house had 3 rooms, one for my granny, one for me, and one for my uncle, who lived with us. Uncle Richard, he was kind of a strange dude, and, well, he wasn't married yet either. He dedicated his life to work and to look after my grandma. That night, after I was settled, Uncle Richard invited me to have a beer with him and his friends. At the bar, we met with his friends who seemed very nice, loud and fun, but there was something about 2 of his 3 friends. They looked rather sick. Their faces were pale with dark circles under their eyes, and they were also severely underweight. I didn't want to seem rude, so I tried not to look shocked, and after a couple hours of drinking, the 2 guys mentioned they were going to the Molinas. My uncle and his other friend Bart declined the invitation. When the men left, Bart said, "Those guys are getting lost," which made me curious, so I asked them what the Molinas were, but they replied by saying it was nothing and not to worry about it. 2 months later, I started to work for my uncle and his friends, and surprisingly, I was one of the best workers. For some strange reason, I seemed to be one of the fit ones, which is crazy, because I was always the weak one back at school. But some of these guys' physical abilities were downright terrible. Some of them were so thin and looked as if they didn't sleep. One day, while I was working, they sent me and my uncle somewhere. As we were in the outskirts of the village, it caught my attention to see a house that looked very familiar. I asked whether we had passed through here before, and he said no. The house was a little different from the others. It had a different structure. I went to work that day knowing I had seen the place before. We worked in a farm the whole afternoon, and it got a bit late, so by the time we left the farm, it was already dark. We had to pass through that house again, but this time there was something different. There were many cars parked around the house. I could also tell that there was some gentlemen outside the house. Among them, it was Will, one of my uncle's friends. I told my uncle to stop the car and say hi to Will, but he refused to do it. And I asked him what was going on in there, but he remained silent. Once we got home, we went to sleep early, only to wake up to terrible news. Will had died. I couldn't believe what happened. We had just seen him the night before. I knew he was looking like crap lately, but apparently he wasn't even sick. No one really knows what he died of. However, I heard Roger, one of my uncle's friends, telling my uncle that last time he saw Will, they were together at the Molinas, when he suddenly disappeared. In the morning, when his wife opened the door, she found him dead by the entry. Apparently, he looked terrible, as if he had been drained and there was nothing else but skin. At the viewing, they kept the coffin shut, so there was no way to verify these claims, but I was very curious. After the funeral, Uncle Richard, Bart, Roger, and I went drinking at the usual place. After a few hours, Roger and my uncle retired. Uncle Richard told me not to wait for him that night, but didn't give me any explanation. A few beers later, we left the place as well. Bart, who was older than me and a local, decided to walk me home. He was the nicest one of all of them, apart from my uncle, of course. And as we were walking, I decided to ask Bart about the Molinas. He explained that the Molinas was a place that gentlemen frequented. In other words, it was a brothel. And I asked Bart if he had been there, but he said no. Bart was married and he had no plans of cheating on his wife. I asked him which kind of people visited the place, and he said that both married and single men. Now I could not believe that you could find those kinds of things in such an innocent-looking town. And Bart asked me whether I had interest going there, and I replied by saying that I didn't. Afterwards, Bart said something that had me thinking. "I'm glad you don't want to go to that place. In fact, please never go anywhere near there. They say women there are as beautiful as they are lethal." And I asked him if my uncle frequented that place, but he remained silent. I didn't need to ask about Roger and Will because I knew they did. There was something about this place that sounded wrong. That night, I just couldn't stop thinking. Where's my uncle? Why did Will die? Did something happen to Will at the Molinas? And why do people say women there are lethal? Why is the building of the Molinas so familiar? I had too many questions that needed answering, and for that, I had a plan. I woke up early the next day, 5:30 in the morning to be exact. I checked on my grandma, and as I had planned, she was sleeping. And then I went to my uncle's room. He was sleeping as well. I silently left my house and headed to the Molinas. I knew the place seemed empty during the day and was busy during the night, so I thought no one would catch me if I went there. I was standing in front of the house, trying to remember where I've seen it before, but nothing came to my mind. I tried to get closer to the house in order to look through one of the windows when the door suddenly opened. I didn't have time to hide, so I was caught by a woman. But she was no regular woman. She was drop dead gorgeous. It was such a weird thought coming from me. I never considered any person cute, let alone sexy, but there was something about this tall, curvy, long-haired woman. Her hair was dark and curly, her lips naturally red and full, and her eyes were almost red. I've never seen anything like it before. She asked me what was going on and if I wanted to come inside. I wasn't thinking clearly. I could only think about her beauty, so I accepted. In the house, there were many other beautiful women walking around, and I felt as if I were in heaven. The young-looking lady who invited me said she'd introduce me to someone. I just followed her. She took me to the living room where another stunning woman with similar features was sitting. However, once I saw this woman, I came to my senses. I had seen her before, and I knew exactly where. As soon as I had that thought, I looked at all the women and noticed that they were no longer beautiful. They didn't even look like humans anymore. In fact, they looked more like gargoyles. I didn't scream, but my first instinct was saying I'm sorry, but I have to go, as I rushed to the door and exited the place. The young lady who opened the door tried to follow me, but I managed to be faster. I ran and ran until I finally got home. I knew where I've seen the house. I knew where I've seen the woman in the living room. I locked my room not to be disturbed, opened one of my night drawers, and grabbed a book. It was the same book that the librarian gave me before I moved here. I searched the page with the map, the one that also had pictures from the village. In one of the pictures you could see the Molina's house still looking like today. No difference at all. But the weirdest thing is that the outside of the house you could see the same woman that I met earlier. The one that tried to question me in the living room. The problem was that this picture was taken in the 1930s. And there was no way for these women to still look the same way. Now, I was sure that the scary appearance was their real form, not me just going nuts. I just didn't know what they were. I rushed to Bart's house to get some help. I spoke to him and told him what happened and showed him the evidence I had. Bart was shocked, but he came to the conclusion he knew what they were. The women were succubus. Succubus are demons who adopt a female form. They attract men with their beauty and sexuality. And the worst kinds are quiet or silent. It is said that the health of those who are in contact with the succubus gets worse and worse until they eventually die. And that explains why many of the men in town look so haggard, and why some deaths, such as Will's, have no explanation. Bart and I knew that we had to finish this madness. We told everything to my uncle that afternoon, and the next morning, with the help of other men in town, we decided to burn the Molinas to make sure that they didn't hurt anyone else. We made sure that the place was locked so that none of them could escape. That day, the town heard wrenching screams as never before, and red smoke covered the place for a few hours. I'm glad to say that ever since that day, the village had been much better. No one has died of mysterious causes, and everyone that was in contact with them is doing well. So, if you ever feel randomly and intensely attracted to a strange person, you better think twice, because you don't know what they could be.